Okay. Today we're going to start Samach Zayin Amud Beis. That's 67b. We'll start. It's like 3 lines up from the wide lines in the Skyro. Okay. Thank Hashem that we're able to learn Torah every day. And the schus of our learning we should have the Beis Hamikdash immediately. Okay, we're quoting a statement from Ravin in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Ravin was a traveler. He would bring statements from Eretz Yisrael from Rabbi Yochanan. So what his statement was that if there's marriage, like 2 non-Jewish people get married and they have a child, so that child is considered what? If they come from two different nations. So he says you always go by the worst one. That's when it comes to, by the nations you go after the male, but you go after the father, and once they convert, then you go after the worst one. So we learned what does it mean by the nations you go after the father. We said that we don't say that we consider him a Kanani if the father's a Kanani, and then we consider not a Kanani if it's only the mother that's a Kanani. Yeah, otherwise it doesn't matter. Right. Now, the next part of that statement was Niskairo, if they convert, you go after whichever one is worse, more blemished. But what would be the case? How would that look? Let's say you have an Egyptian man that marries an Ammonite woman. Now, the rule with the Ammoni is that it's only the men that have a problem getting married into the congregation, but the women have no problem with that. So the Gemara says, "My pagamika." Well, so only one of them really has a blemish. The problem, what the Gemara is doing here is it says the statement was halachachara pagam shebishneim. You go after whichever one has a worse blemish. Now, if one of them doesn't have any blemish, Amayna says no blemish at all. So then that's obviously not the case because it doesn't fit with the wording. So my pagamika, what pagam is there? Amayna v'lei Amaynas. There's only a problem with being from the Ammonite family if it's a male, not a woman. Ella, we have to do it exactly the opposite. It's Amayni Shinasa Mitzvahs. We have a man from Ammon. That's a problem. Can't marry into the congregation. He's a convert, and Shinasa Mitzvahs, and he marries an Egyptian convert, a woman. Now, the rule by an Egyptian convert is it takes 3 generations for them to marry into the congregation. So we go after the one that's worse. Now, if it's a male, so if this one is a male, the child, so Shadia Abasre Didei, then we'll consider him an Ammonite, Ammoni. Why? Because that's much worse. He can never marry into the congregation if he's an Ammoni, if his children are all boys. Yeah, they can convert, sure. Yeah, they convert. They just can't marry into the congregation. And if it's a female, so Shadia Basidida, then we'll say that it's a Egyptian, because the Egyptian female has a bigger problem than a Ammoni female. Ammoni female has no problem, but Egyptian female has to take 3 generations. So what's going to happen here is that if what was the mother? The mother in this case was a mistress. The mother's an Egyptian, marries a man from Ammon. Mr. Ammon marries Mrs. Mistress, and they have a child. Now, if the child is a boy, then we say the child is a little Ammon, Mr. Ammon Jr. And if the child is a girl, so then we say she's Miss Mistress Junioress. Because that's gonna be worse. Okay. What is it? If there's 2 children?
Yeah.
So a boy, it would be dependent if it's a boy or a girl. Whatever. If it's a boy and a girl. So the boy would be considered a Ammonite, and the girl would be considered a Yeah, we're always going to apply to them whatever's worse. That's a good point. Okay, now we jump back to the Mishnah. This was explaining a Rav and Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Now we go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that any marriage that's not acceptable at all, it's not even considered a Kiddushin, it's not even considered a marriage, like someone marries his close relative, sister or something. So then the children from such a union are mamzerim. That's what we learned in the Mishnah. Gemara says, Minani Mili, how do we know that the marriage doesn't even take place when it's a close relative? How do we know it's considered nothing?
It's my favorite, that's for sure.
Right? It's an Aveira, but it doesn't work. So is there an Aveira if it doesn't work? I'm not sure. Maybe it would only mean if there's relations. Is an Aveira if someone gives, or it just doesn't, if someone gives his sister a ring? Is that an Aveira? Just gave a ring. So, yeah, you're married to me in front of witnesses. If there's relations, then it's very serious. But just a ring, it's nothing. They definitely don't need a divorce, but was that considered an Aveira? I'm not sure. That would be a Gemara Tamura. In Tamura, they have that whole discussion. What is it? Yavid Mahani, if you did something that the Torah forbids you, if it. Okay, anyway. Rab Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rab Chia bar Abba says name of Rabbi Yochanan Matam Mishim Rabbi Yanai, and some say that it was goes back to Rabbi Yanai. Rabbi Acha Brei Rava Umat ba Mishim Rabbi Yaglili. Rabbi Brei Rava says it wasn't Rabbi Yanai, it was Rabbi Yaglili that it goes back to much earlier. And what's the source? We're looking for a source that the marriage is not effective at all if it's a close relative. Amakra, it says it says that he leaves the house and he goes and he marries another. She leaves the house after a divorce and she goes and she marries another man. Pasuk is talking about that a woman gets divorced, she marries another man, she can't go back to the first husband afterwards. Well, it says, and she marries another man. Where does v'haisa? And she becomes. That's our term for marriage. Yeah, but first it says she becomes in marriage to another man, li'ish acher. Well, la'acherim v'lei l'kreivim. It comes to teach me that marriage only takes place when it's not a relative, li'ish acher, to someone else. Maskef Rababa has a question. Be'ima la'acher v'lei l'ben. How do you know it's talking about every single forbidden marriage that it's telling you it doesn't work? Maybe it's only talking about the son of this man, which means that this woman is not allowed to marry her husband's son. Since she goes and she marries another man, but not his closest relative, which would be his son. And which would also mean exactly the reverse, that a child is not allowed to marry his father's wife, even after they're divorced.
In the first marriage, they had a daughter.
Doesn't have to be
marry someone else.
Doesn't have to be her son.
Her, and then the ex-husband marries their son from the first marriage.
The ex-wife marries the son.
Yeah.
So but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be that it's their son. Here it's saying it just could be his son, which would be his closest relative. We're talking about that she leaves his house and she goes to another man. Maybe it's only. And we're learning that it needs to be another man, but not a close relative. So maybe it's only referring to the closest relative, but relatives that are a little bit distant, that the marriage would work. What's the closest relative? Would be his son. So the Gemara says, no, ben behediksiv bey. Regarding his son, I have a different verse. It says, layikach ish es eshes aviv. I have a clear prohibition that a son is not allowed to marry his father's wife. We already have that.
Be a stepson.
Stepson means that it's
There's no blood.
It's no blood. No, that wouldn't be a problem.
Even it was father and daughter.
Yeah, but it's not. It's not a blood relative. Tell me again. Anyone there?
Yeah.
Right. It's considered nothing. Is it a prohibition? Doesn't
Stop
say.
sneezing.
Doesn't say. Yeah. Okay.
It's considered nothing.
If a brother gives a sister a ring, it's considered nothing. And that's what we're learning here. We're learning here that if someone marries a close relative, it's considered nothing. But the Gemara is challenging. Maybe it's only nothing by if he marries his father's wife. So we said no. For that we have a verse already. Bless you.
Bless you.
Acher la Melissa. Why do I need the other verse? It's coming to teach me all other relatives. All other relatives. It's not. No. It's not considered a marriage. Okay. Maybe I have two verses that are talking about a woman not marrying her husband's son. Maybe I have two verses for that. We were saying that because I have two verses, one of them must be not to marry the son, and one of them is telling me that a marriage to any other relative is considered nothing. Maybe there's two verses just for the son, and I don't have anything about marriage to other relatives. Maybe marriage to other relatives is considered a marriage. So it says, and so why would I need two verses for the same law? It says halachatchila hadiyavet. One is telling me lechatchila. That means initially you're not allowed to do the marriage. Diyavet means once you did it, it's not considered a marriage. It would be a prohibition in performing the marriage. Then there would be another prohibition. Then there would be a rule that it doesn't work. Okay. Gemara says the prohibition we already know from another source. Lechatchila, that prohibition to do the marriage, me'achais isha nafka. That I learned from not to marry what does it say? Isha el achaisa lesika. A woman and her sister you can't marry. You can't marry two sisters. It says over there lesika, which lesika tells me lechatchila, you shall not do this.
So what if it's
Sounds
not
like
intentional, like Jacob?
That's that exactly that point, exactly that example. Like Jacob was not allowed to do that, but it just wasn't intentional. So if it would be after the giving of the Torah, then that would be a prohibition. And we would learn from this verse that it's prohibited to do. And we would also have another verse that would tell me, because I have another verse that says the same thing that initially. So then I would end up knowing that all other close relatives you're not allowed to marry. Yeah, that's a problem. It's the same problem, right? It's machlekes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemia.
Yeah, so after they found out, like Jacob, does he have to divorce one of them?
That's a good question. Because it's before the giving of the Torah, they're asking, there's a discussion here on the table about the tribes marrying their sisters. Yeah. So by Yaakov, we know there's an explanation for it, but how could the other tribes do it? Right. Well, the Gemara now elaborates on what we just said, that lechatchila, you can't marry a close relative because we see that lechatchila, a woman and her sister, you're not allowed to marry, right? You can't marry two sisters. Ma chaysisha bekaris leisikdash, leisikadesh. If there's a prohibition not to marry a woman and her sister, which is not the most serious of the forbidden marriages. There's much more serious than that. That's only a prohibition of karis if someone marries two sisters. There's other prohibitions, a daughter or a mother or something. Chayvi Mrs. Bezdin, like Kolshkin, when it comes to Chayvi Mrs. Bezdin, when it comes to the death penalty, capital punishment, for sure it would be a prohibition. Kumar says, 1 second. So what we're holding now is that I have another source for the lechatchila doing such a marriage, which would leave the verse extra, which would tell me that it applies to all other relatives. Gemara says, maybe both verses are only talking about marrying the two sisters, and I don't know anything about the marrying the son and marrying the two sisters. Other relatives, I wouldn't know anything. The Gemara says, you're right, enechanami. You're right. It could really be like that. However, Ashkechan Achais Isha, Shara Rayas Minolan, how do we know that other relatives you can't do a marriage that is not considered a marriage? So it says Yalfina Me'achais Isha. I would learn it from the two sisters. Just like by the two sisters. What is the factor there that makes it that there's no marriage? Well, it's the fact is that there's relatives that's prohibited. It's if it's done on purpose, there's karis. If it's done unintentionally, you have to bring a carbon, and the Kiddushin is nothing. So I would note to everything else as well that it's not considered a marriage. What we're learning here is if someone marries a close relative, if it's considered a marriage at all, if they need to get divorced, or if it's considered absolutely nothing. It's like someone marries a table. Remember Shabsai Tzvi in the books? He married a Sefer Torah. That was his bride. So it's not considered anything.
Question is, can the Torah make a
Just 1 second, yeah.
You want to make sisters like rival wives. Okay. Would it be correct?
That could be a correct logic for it, but that doesn't limit it. It doesn't limit it. Yeah.
I was wondering, so if one passes, it's still not allowed?
If one passes, it is allowed. Yeah. They pass away, it's allowed, yeah.
There's no ceremony, like.
There's no yibam. That's correct. It's not a mitzvah to marry the deceased wife's sister. That's not a mitzvah. It's just permissible. Okay. Now the Gemara says, well, we're doing now is a comparison. You're doing a comparison to marrying two sisters, which that's not considered a Kiddushin. So to every other close relative that a person would try to marry is not considered a Kiddushin. The Gemara says it's a good comparison in most cases. I could learn all relatives from the two sisters. However, I have a problem. When it comes to a married woman, and when it comes to a sister-in-law, that means the brother's wife, those are not comparable to the son, they're not comparable to the two sisters. We'll see in a second why. Because Malach Isisha, when it comes to the two sisters, there is no permissible way of doing this, of marrying two sisters, right? It's never, it doesn't become permitted like Yibam does. But Yibam, when it comes to marrying your sister-in-law, there is a mitzvah. It does become permissible. If the brother passed away, then you do marry your sister-in-law. And now the Gemara has another question. What we're doing is we're saying the contrast between them would tell me that the rule that applies to the two sisters would not apply to the other cases, because the other cases have a leniency. Maybe if someone marries his sister-in-law, since there is a case where it's permissible, maybe if he marries her when it's not permissible, because there is a case where it is permissible, maybe that marriage should be effective. You say, well, let's compare it to the two sisters. The two sisters is totally different. Over there, it's never permissible. Well, it is after she dies, but not when she's alive. When it comes to a married woman, the same thing. If a married woman to marry a woman that's already married is a problem, right? But I could say that maybe there's a leniency by the married woman, because the married woman, even while the husband's alive, it's possible for it to be permitted to another man. How? With a divorce. So since over there is a permissibility, right? They can give a divorce. So I would say that if someone marries her while she's still married, because if would be divorced, that would be acceptable. So even while she's still married, I could say that maybe the marriage is actually valid. So what we did right now is we switched from a binyanav to a hekesh. Originally, we were starting with a precedent we find such a concept in the Torah, we'll apply it to everywhere else in the Torah. Only thing is that you can only do that if everything is comparable. Once there's something that's not comparable, then you lose that precedent. You can't compare. So a binyanav would be limited to things that are comparable. The Gemara calls a binyanav mamatzino. Rabbi Shmuel calls it a binyanav, and we say in davening, binyanav is one of the 13 ways. In the Gemara, it's called the mamatzino, just as we find. It's precedent. In Aramaic, ma means just as.
Can you marry your aunt?
No.
Uncle.
No, you can a girl can marry her uncle though.
If a guy marries two sisters, and they have kids, and the kids marry, once there would be nephew or niece, and the first cousin.
But they share the same father.
Right.
So they would be brothers from the father. That's the problem. Sharing the paternal brothers, right? In certain cases, yeah. Certain cases. Okay, so now we have a verse that compares all of the arayas, all of the prohibited marriages, compares them to one to another, and so that's called the hekesh. Hukshu kol arayas kulam lachais isha. They're all compared to the two sisters, and ma'achais isha leitafsi b'kedushin of kol arayas kulam leitafsi b'kedushin. Just like by the two sisters, it's not considered even a marriage; it doesn't require a divorce. So too, by all other prohibited marriages, it's not even considered a marriage. The achi. That's an interesting question. If that's the case, that anyone that's prohibited to marry, sorry, you see what's going on? If that's the case, that a prohibited marriage is not even considered a marriage, so what about afilu nida nami? Let's say the woman, when it comes time for the marriage, she becomes a nida, becomes tameh, she has her cycle. So should we say that that's not even considered a marriage? Why did Abaya say we jump to another issue. We jump into why did Abaya say that? You see, we have two opinions in the Gemara. I have the opinion of Shimon Atimani and Rabbi Akiva. Shimon Atimani says that a mamzer comes from what is a mamzer is a child that was born from a adulterous. A prohibited relationship. So what type of prohibited relationship? So Shimon Atimani says only if the punishment of that relationship would have been kares. Rabbi Kiva says even if the punishment of that relationship would have been lashes, which is much more lenient.
So it could be a relative, also, not just a married.
Right, it would be a relative as well, according to Shimon Atimani. And Rabbi Kiva adds even other cases that it would be a mamzer. He's more strict about this. But everyone seems to say that if someone lives with the nida, the child is not a mamzer.
She can't conceive if she's
well, there's two parts to that. It's improbable for her to become pregnant when she's a nida, but it doesn't mean that when she's not a nida, she's automatically pure. She needs to go to the mikveh before she's pure. So it could be that she's actually ovulates. Whatever, and she's still a nida. She never went to the mikveh.
So you mean she doesn't ovulate?
Could be the conception would be at the time of ovulation, right? So that's but it doesn't mean that she's purified, because in order to be purified, she has to go to the mikveh. Yeah. Now, even according to Rabbi Kiva, everyone agrees that it's not a mamzer. Even the Rabbi Kiva that's so strict, it's not considered a mamzer. Yeah, Amar Chizkiya. So our problem over here is that if you want to say that all arayas are all comparable one to another, and you can't even say that this one is different because we did a hekesh. Hekesh says that it's a like a forced comparison. That even if you're going to come up with differences, we ignore them. So if that's the case, then the nida, which we have a lot of differences in nida, it's a totally different story. But nevertheless, it's still considered one of the prohibited relations, and we say that the child's not a mamzer. We have a verse that says that the nida is upon her, and when we say the vatihi, and it will be, it's coming to tell us that the marriage is still effective even while she's a nida. I thought the Rambam's opinion was that it's prohibited to do a marriage when she's a nida. Right. Right. Does happen.
Still go through.
But I think that there's certain.
I think in today's day and age, the marriage is common, so if you
Possibly depending on depending on what the actual nisuin is. If it's bringing into the house, right?
things,
Right. Right. They do. If the kala is nida, I think what they do is they go to, instead of going to a hotel, they would go to the parents' house, and then they just stay in the parents' house. The way it's not a problem of yichud. There's another issue of yichud.
separate rooms.
Yeah, could be separate rooms or at least the door open, whatever. Okay. So now the Gemara says michti. Michti, let's see. You know that? Michti? That's a common word in the Gemara. It officially means now that, but in yeshiva they just say michti, let's see. Yeah. We could do a comparison here to nida. And nida, the marriage is effective. We can do a comparison to two sisters. The marriage is not effective. What did you see that you have to do the comparison to the two sisters where the marriage is not effective? Maybe you should compare all the other relatives, all those marriages to the nida where the marriage is effective. The Gemara says, whenever I have an option of leniency or an option of stringency, when it comes to a hekesh, you always do the stringent part in the hekesh. Okay, this is not a rule for everything, but this is when it comes to a hekesh, that's the rule. Okay, so comparing to the two sisters would be the stricter one, and that's the one that we accept. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov says, what was this choice? He says, Asya b'kal v'chaymer mi Yavama. Can learn from mi Yavama. Ma Yavama she belav. A Yavama marrying someone that's not her Yavam. I have a woman that's waiting to marry her. She's a widow, and she's waiting to marry her husband's brother, right? Her deceased husband's brother, her brother-in-law. She's waiting, and instead she goes and she marries someone else. So that's a lav, and the rule is like tafsi but kedushin. That's not considered a kedushin. So chayvi mises krisus like kolshkin. I have all the more so if it's a much stricter prohibition. See, that's only a negative prohibition.
She doesn't have the choice to do it. It's the brother that.
Yeah, he chooses. Option, right? Well, yeah, I don't remember if it's only if she wants also. I think she has to agree to it as well.
She could agree, but she can't choose. I want to do police. Right?
I'm not sure. Does she give him a choice?
And learned that she.
So she's automatically she enters into a marriage that she may not want. I think I remember at the beginning there was some sort of choice there if she doesn't like it or something. Let's say the guy has some sort of disease. She's like forced into that marriage. I think we discussed something, a mukashchin or something. Anyway, so we have now another source that the kedushin should not be chal. We can learn a kal v'chaymer kedushin. The marriage should not be effective. Learn from a kal v'chaymer from the Yavama where it's not effective. Then, if that's the case, then we should say the same thing applies to all other negative prohibitions. You know, what would a negative prohibition? A kayan to a gerusha, right? Is a negative prohibition. Say that it's not even effective, according to this. Rav Papa comes up with, I have a verse that actually tells me that if there's a negative prohibition, the marriage is yes effective. So what's the verse? The verse is talking about that if a man has two wives, one of them he loves and one of them he hates, so he's not allowed to give priority in the inheritance to the one that he loves over the firstborn of the one that he hates. It's not allowed to do that. It has to be exactly how it was set up. How it's right, exactly. The problem here is, what do you mean? One he loves and one he hates. In front of God, is there such a thing that he loves one and he hates one? No, it means to talking about that the one that he loves means that it's a possible marriage. It was a correct marriage. Snua is snua b'neseh. And the one that he hates is referring to because he wasn't supposed to marry her. Why wasn't he supposed to marry? Because it's prohibited. Become Rachmana Kisiana, and the Torah nevertheless says that he's married to both. So you see, even though there was a prohibition, but it's still considered a marriage. That tells me that a marriage is effective when there's a negative prohibition on it. Okay. Rabbi Kiva, how do you do this according to Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Akiva says, he's much stricter about this, and he says that the marriage is not effective even if it's a negative prohibition. So Kisiana by my mukim, how would he understand Kisiana? That it says that the marriage is yes effective when one is hated, which means that it's prohibited. It's talking about Balmana Lakayin Gadol, Ukrab Simai. It's talking about not when there's a negative prohibition, but when there's a positive. It says, what does it say about the Almana? Who Isha Bifsala? Does it say? Is that a negative prohibition or is that a positive? Okay, let me take a look. Rab Simai, the tiny Rab Simai, Menakol Haya, Rabbi Kiva, Isamam Zerchatz Me'almana Lekayin Gadol, Shrei Amra Torah Le'Yechalel. He said he should not make profane, which means Chilula Ma'aseh V'Einay Simam Seirus. I guess it's a negative prohibition that he's not supposed to marry a widow. But this is one exception because it says in the verse, it says that he should not make his children halalim, which tells me that they only become halalim, they don't become mamzerim. They don't become mamzerim, that means that the marriage was yes effective. Okay. So back to Kisiana Lishtei Nashim, when a man will have two wives, one of them he loves, one of them he hates. According to Rabbi Akiva, where most marriages won't be effective, how does he have two wives if one of them he hates? Well, that means it was an invalid marriage. So we answer that by saying that it's talking about a Kohen Gadol, a high priest marrying a widow, where over there the marriage is yes effective, even though it's prohibited, according to Rab Simai. Okay. Now the Gemara says, Hanicha Rabbi Sheva of the Amar Bayev and Atzaveach Halakiva ben Yosef Shayem Kol Shein Le'Bia B'Yisrael Havlad Mamzer. Rabbi Yeshev says that even a almana to a Kohen Gadol is going to be the child is a mamzer. This is come. Let us prove Rabbi Akiva about Rabbi Akiva that any prohibited marriage, the child is a mamzer. That would include also the widow marrying the Kohen Gadol. It says Hanichel Rabbi Yeshev ilafukim Rabbi Simai kasi shaper. If Rabbi Yeshev is only excluding that one detail that Rabbi Simai said, which is the almana to the Kohen Gadol, we can explain this. How will we explain this? We'll say that there's other cases where it's a mitzvah, where it's a positive command that's being violated. But if Rabbi Yeshev is saying his own logic, he's not just coming to talk about the almana, the widow, to the high priest, but he's including everything. So how will he establish the pasuk that talks about the wife that's hated, which is we say is a prohibited marriage? There's no such thing as a prohibited. If the marriage was prohibited, then they're not married, according to that. Gemara says it's talking about if the Kohen Gadol marries a girl that's not a virgin, and that would mean that she's not. There's no negative prohibition there. It's only a neglect of a positive command. It says that he's supposed to marry someone that's a virgin. So that's a neglect of a positive command, not a violation of a negative command. Ma'ishna, what's the difference? Because that's a positive command that's not equal to everyone. It's only in this one specific case of the Kohen Gadol. So there's more leniency there because it's not across the board. So we'll say that that's considered a marriage, even though it wasn't acceptable, and that would be the case of a man that has two wives, one he loves and one he hates. That was the one that he hates is the one that he wasn't allowed to marry because of a neglect of a positive command. What about the other opinion? They should establish it that it's talking about chayv yaseh. What's the Gemara asking here? Maybe we should extend it also to all of these cases, that there's no marriage by these cases as well. So it says, Hani chayv yaseh b'may niyu. What are we talking about? Chayv yaseh. Ishtei mitzrius. If there would be, when we're going back to look at that case, we're looking at a man that marries two women, one he loves and one he hates. And we said, according to the Rabbanan, that that's talking about that he married one was a prohibited marriage. Let's say a Chayve Lavin was a kayan to a divorcee or something. It says, let's say it's talking about a positive command, a neglect of a positive command. How would that work? Ishtay and Mitzvahs, let's say the two wives are both Egyptian converts. And there's a positive command in the Torah that they should wait 3 generations before they marry into the congregation. And he neglected that positive command and he married them both. So it says Shteim Snus, and they're both hated. We're talking about one is loved and one is hated. That would have been the obvious suggestion. So one of them is a mitzvah, which is a neglect of a positive command. You're supposed to wait another generation before that family can marry in. And one of them is Yisraelis. So one is loved and one is hated. It says, no, that doesn't fit. It's probably that both of them should be from the same nation. It says she has 2 wives. There's a comparison there, 2 wives, probably from the same nation, not one this, one that. Maybe it's the case that we just said. It says it's a ba'ula, a woman that's not a virgin, was marrying a kain gadol, a high priest, and that would be the case. One of his wives was a virgin, one of his wives wasn't. So miksiv kisiana lakayin. Does it say if she'll marry a kayin? When a kayin has 2 wives, it says a man has 2 wives. It's not only specifically a kayin; it's any man. So we don't like that. Rabbi Akiva. So how did Rabbi Akiva get away with that? It says, well, Rabbi Akiva, he's compelled. He had to say one of these cases because he didn't have another option. So he was willing to say that even though it says he's willing to say that it's talking about a case of a kayan that's marrying a beula. Okay. The pasuk was actually in another commentary. The pasuk is referring. It's a follow-up of that, where he takes a woman captive in battle, and then he ends up hating her, and then she has the Ben Seira Meira. All of those cases are one after another. All come from the woman in battle. Yeah, our Gemara is not following that teaching. Okay. Anyone that doesn't have any marriage at all, there's no such thing as a marriage to her. So then we said the child follows her. That was the 4th category in our Mishnah. What would be someone that has no marriage at all? So we said that was talking about maybe a maidservant or maybe a non-Jew. There's no marriage there. So it says Shifcha Kananis Minalan. How do we know that there's no marriage to a non-Jewish maidservant? Amar Rav Huna says this is totally not politically correct. Amar Kra, it says in the pasuk Shvulachem Payim Achamar. It says you should wait here with the donkey. He tells Eliezer or something. Am Adayim Achamar. It says a nation that's comparable to the donkey. Means that just like it's impossible to marry an animal, so there's no marriage by a servant, by a slave woman as well. Okay, so I get it. There's no marriage. You can't do a marriage it's not considered a marriage that would require a divorce. But how do I know that the child that is from that union follows the woman? Maybe the child follows the father. The pasuk says, it says when there's an Eved Ivri, a Jewish slave, the master is allowed to mate him with a non-Jewish maid servant, right? And it says that the woman, the wife, and her children belong to the master. Why do they belong to the master? Because they follow the woman, they follow the mother's lineage, which is that she was a slave. Okay, so we know that a slave, there's no marriage, that we know from Amadai Melachamar. We know that the children from a union between a Jewish man and a slave woman follows they continue being slaves, right? They stay in that house. So we have everything set for that, for the shifcha, and they're not Jewish. Nachris minalan. How do we know if someone marries a non-Jew that it's not considered a marriage? Well, it says, Amakra leitischaten bam. You should not marry from them. Or soon it's going to tell us that that's only talking about the 7 nations. We'll see. I think the Gemara is going to say that. I don't know why I just have that in my head. Yeah, the Gemara is going to say that. Okay, so Ashkachna deletafsi bakidushi. So I got it that there's no marriage there because it says you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to marry them. However, Vlada Kamaisim, how do we know that if a man marries a non-Jewish woman, the child is not Jewish? Where do we know that from? Yeah, a big question. Rabbi Yechon says in the name of Shimon ben Yochai, the pasuk says, when it says that you shouldn't marry them, it says your son, it says your daughter you should not give to his son, and his daughter you should not take for your son. And it says because he will cause your son to stray. He will cause your son to stray. Okay, now cause kiyasir bincha will cause your son to stray. Bincha, your son, habam Yisraelis kari bincha. Where does it say he will cause your son to stray? It says that right after his daughter. Let me see this again. His daughter, your daughter, you should not give to his son. And Yasiras Bitcha. Ben Anelad Merit Kechavim Bitcha Kama.
Should I read what it says?
Yeah.
Are you at the beginning of the
Yeah. What I'm looking at is, it says 2 things. It says you can't take your daughter. You can't take you can't take his son for your daughter, and you can't take his daughter for your son. Okay, now the concern is that if you do that, then it says it's going to cause your son to stray. So the Gemara's understanding that what does it mean your son? It's going to cause your son to follow it's going to cause you, what it means, it's going to cause your grandson to follow the father worshiping idols. But why is he considered your grandson? It's only considered your grandson because it's the son of your daughter. But if it would have been the other way, if it would have been the son of your son, then it wouldn't have been considered your grandson. That's what the Gemara is learning. But how exactly it learns it out, I have to go through this Rashi carefully. It says, Bincha bam Yisrael is kari bincha. Your son that comes from a Jewish woman is considered your son. But your son that comes from a non-Jewish woman is not considered your son, it's considered her son. Okay.
So Hagar was.
No, and what does that mean?
Which indicates that the maid servant's son won her status rather than that of his father. Like the son is going to follow his mother first.
What does that have to do? What does that have to do with Ishmael? How does that connect?
Ishmael followed Hagar's ways instead of Abraham.
Oh, you're saying because the mother wasn't Jewish. Okay.
My question is the verse here in the Devarim. Neither shall you make this is just regarding like all prohibited marriages that doesn't result in a marriage in and of itself. Is that like a prohibition, or is that just like nothing, or is it both?
Over here it's saying that it's nothing. Like
So it's
tafsi
not a
b'kedushin.
but it's not a prohibition per se.
So we said before that there's a prohibition and there's two parts to it. There's a prohibition and there's also the after the fact. That's what we said. There's a lachatchila and b'diavad. Now, what I'm seeing in Rashi is that because it doesn't say ki yaser es bit, it says ki yaser es bitay me'acharai. It doesn't say will cause your daughter to stray. So that would mean okay, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how the Gemara exactly learns this out. That's what the Gemara understands. Let me see the notes in this. Can I use your Gemara?
Please do.
Okay. The first verse also enjoined, nor shall you take his daughter, the heathen daughter,
Dr. Stein, to this year
for your Jewish son. Hence, the following verse should have additionally warned, for she will turn your son away. Since your son for he will turn your son away refers to the Jewish grandchild, we would have derived from, for she will turn your son away, that a child born to a heathen mother and a Jewish father is likewise Jewish. Since, in fact, the Torah does not state for she will turn your son away, the exact opposite is implied. The child born from such a union is not considered your son, rather he is a non-Jew, like his mother. Okay, whatever. It's complicated. Okay, now we're holding Amar Ravina. Ravina says, Shema Mina. We learned from this that Ben Bitcha Haba Min Ovid Kechavim Kari Bincha. Your grandchild, which means your daughter's son, that if the daughter married a non-Jew, that child is considered your grandson. It's considered your son. Maybe Ravina holds. Why do we think this? That that the child is considered your son, but maybe it's considered a mamzer because it's a prohibited marriage, right? She married someone that wasn't permissible. It says Nihida kasher lehavi mamzer lehavi pasal mikri. Although he's not considered kosher, he's also not considered a mamzer. He's just considered pasal. The Gemara now goes back and asks, pasal means like like there's a defect, but it doesn't mean there's a mamzer. The Gemara goes back to discuss the verse that we said that prohibited marriages to non-Jewish women. That we didn't even say. That the Gemara didn't even say. I think it says somewhere else that it says like there's a pagam, but it doesn't say. Yeah. Okay. That verse that prohibits marriages to non-Jewish women, that's only talking about the 7 nations of Canaan. It says that you can't marry them. What about all other nations? Amar Kra ki yaser espincha. It will cause. We look at the logic. It says it will cause your son to stray. That would apply to any other nation. It would also cause your son to stray after the father. The father would teach him to worship idols. So Hani Chal Reb Shimon the Darsh time of the Kra. That works well according to Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. That holds that we look at the logic of the pasuk, and we have to follow that. However, the rabbis don't say that. The rabbis say you just follow exactly what the Torah says, and you don't have to make interpretations based on what the logic is. Ela the Rabbanan my time, but how do you know according to the Rabbanan? Amakra, the pasuk says, it says by the woman that's taken captive. Afterwards, you come onto her and you live with her. Obviously, before that process, it was prohibited to live with her. Okay.
I had a question regarding like parents and children in that relation. If you had like a couple that was Gentiles and they gave birth to a son and that son converted, are those parents still considered parents?
Not according to the halacha. No. Yeah.
Yeah, biologically, yeah.
Don't worry, you'll still get the inheritance.
When you do, if someone does get the inheritance, you have to be careful that they make sure that the old avodah zaras don't end up in their hands, because then they can't exchange it with the brother. Remember, we had that tomorrow.
Yeah.
The ger that. Okay, so I got it that the marriage is not effective. And how do we know that the child is considered not Jewish? The pasuk says, "Kisiena leish v'yoldu loi kol hechad lekrin be kisiena krinin be v'yoldu loi kol hechad lekrin be kisiena lekrin be v'yoldu loi." It says if a man will have and will give birth to him, it means only if a man will have that verb will be, the man will be, that verb to be, or it will be to him, right? That it will be means that the marriage was effective. And if the marriage wasn't effective, then we say we don't consider it that he gives birth to him, which means that it follows her, the non-Jewish mother. Yihachi shifchanami, the same thing should apply to a shifcha. The Gemara says, "You're right." So then why do I need that other verse that told me that by the Eved Ivri, when he marries her, that it follows that it goes to the master? I have a verse right here that says that it follows the mother. It says, look at the Tanya. Then I have for another source, on top of Samach Tes. If someone says to his maidservant, he says to his maidservant that was pregnant, he says, you are now free, and your child, I want to keep. Follow? So he's keeping the fetus as a slave. He's telling his maidservant that I'm freeing you, but I'm keeping the fetus as a slave. So Vlad Kamaisa.
And the husband is?
No, it's a maidservant. It doesn't matter who the husband is. So what we learn now is that Rabbi Yossi Agliv says that the what's it called? The fetus is also, the child is also free. He can't do that. He can't separate them. Where do I learn that from? The Isha v'Yiladeh Tiyaladina. We're going to see in a moment. The Chachamim say Dvarav Kayamim, that no, he freed the mother, but the fetus is still a slave. Because it says Isha v'Yiladeh Tiyaladina. Now the Gemara says, how do you know? The Gemara says, my Talmud, what do you see from that? That the child is a slave from that verse. Amarava ad Rabbi Yossi Aglili. That pasuk is going back to Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabbi Yossi Aglili said that when do we say that the child is a slave? Only if the mother's a slave. If the mother's free, the isha v'yilada, the mother and the child could stay. But if the mother's free, then the child isn't a slave. And that's the explanation of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. So we're going back, we're switching now. We're saying that the verse Isha v'yilada tiyaladina, that the woman and the child belong to the master, that's teaching me something else. That's teaching me Rabbi Yossi Aglili's opinion about someone that frees the mother but not this child.
When you regards to like damages, if you farm a mother,
right, you have to pay. To pay for the
pay,
fetus.
But it's not like a double.
It's not, right, exactly. Okay, the next Mishnah is quite an interesting Mishnah. Let's jump right in. It says, Reb Tarfon Eimer. Reb Tarfon says, Yecholen mamzerim litar. Reb Tarfon has a way for a mamzer to become cleansed, laundered, to cleanse the mamzer from his mamzeris. And his children should be allowed to marry in. How would you do this? It says, Ketzat.
Where's Rabbi Tarfon?
On the chart, he is probably slightly above Rabbi Akiva. You have over there Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua.
Yeah, he's under Rabbi Yeshua.
So it says, Ketzat, how does this work? Mamzer shenasa shivcha havlad eved. If a mamzer marries a maidservant, the child becomes a slave. Shechru, you free the child. Nimtza ben chayrin. The child is a free person. It's not a mamzer.
Because he was a slave first.
Because
And
he was a
whenever you
slave.
free a slave, he becomes a yid.
Exactly. Rabbi Eliezer Reimer, blessed says Reza Evid Mamzer. Says this child is going to be a Mamzer.
Ooh.
Okay, we'll see how that works. But the Gemara has a very important question. Gemara has a question. Rabbi Tarfon lechatchila kamar or the Evid kamar? Does Rabbi Tarfon mean that a Mamzer is allowed to marry? You see, a Jewish man is not allowed to marry a slave. She's a slave girl. She's not Jewish. How's he allowed to marry her? So, an Evid would, yes, be allowed to. So, but does he have to, the Gemara is going to ask, does he have to steal, be sold as an Evid then marry her? Or is he saying that this is a special case? Why? Because he's a Mamzer. And a Mamzer, when it says Lysia Kadesha, but the marriage to a Shifcha goes under another category, not of the prohibition of Leitis Chatam. It doesn't go under the prohibition of she's not Jewish. It goes under the prohibition of not to marry a Kadesha. A slave girl is considered Kadesha, which is like a harlot or something. So it goes under that prohibition. Now, what this would mean was that's not allowed to be married. She shouldn't be married into the congregation. But he's not part of the congregation because he's a mamzer. So maybe there's a special exception for a mamzer that he should be allowed to marry the Kadesha, the slave girl. Or do we say the Eved Kamer? Maybe we say that no, he's actually prohibited. And what we're talking about now is that if he does, it's going to work. But not that he was allowed to. Well, Tashima, come and listen. Amalei Reb Tarfon. They told her, Amalei Reb Tarfon. They told her, Reb Tarfon, Tiartes as Charim, Lay Tiartes and Akevas. Your advice would only work for a man that was a mamzer. It would not work for a girl. And if it's saying lechatchila, if it's saying that you're allowed to go in and do this, so mamzeres nami tinasiv lavda, let her go and marry a slave man. It says 1 second. Evidain lechayas. It doesn't help. It doesn't follow this. The slave will follow her. It's not going to work. That's not a proof. The Tashima question is, what was the Gemara? Chayas means like yichas. The question, what was the Gemara thinking? Tashima, come and listen. The Shpezichne de Rab Smalai. What is the Shpezichne? How do they translate that?
Oh.
The what?
Yes.
The landlord. The landlord. Landlord of Rab Smalai, Mamzer Haba. He was a Mamzer. Amalei says, Iya Kadmesech. If I knew you, then before you got married, I could have fixed your child. I could have had you marry according to Reb Tarfon. Now, now, if we say that this is actually permissible to do, so then good. We understand what Reb Smalai said. But if it's only b'di'evet, what does it mean he could fix the child? How's he going to fix the child? The Gemara says that you don't have a proof from this either because the months of Le'etza, he would have given him advice. Go and steal, and you'll be sold as an Eved Ivri, as a Jewish slave. That's funny that the Gemara has no problem suggesting that he would go and steal. In other words, for him to go and marry a non-Jewish slave woman, that the Gemara says, how could he have given him that advice? But to give him advice to go and steal, the Gemara is fine with. And then he's going to get sold as a slave, and then it's interesting, no? I guess one is much more severe. How does it become, according to this option, he's only allowed to marry a non-Jewish slave girl if he is an Eved Ivri. How does he become an Eved Ivri? He has to steal and be sold as a slave. Yeah, so we're saying that he would be sold as a slave through stealing, and that's the advice that Reb Smalai would have given him. The Gemara asks a different question, though. It says, did they have Eved Ivri during that time? There's only Eved Ivri if there's Yovel, and there's only Yovel in the first temple. It must mean that he doesn't need to be an Eved Ivri, and Reb Tarfon was saying, Shma mina, Amar Rav Yudah Mishmal, halacha is Reb Tarfon. The halacha is like Reb Tarfon. You can actually do this. We had Oh, what about selling himself into slavery? Why does he have to give him advice to steal? Let me see.
One of the
Or is that only like a daughter that you sell?
it's one of the things as opposed to
Oh, it goes through. Yeah. That's all.
An interesting Rabitzal Ranchberg on the bottom of my Gemara. That's an interesting question. He says that it's only if he's married that you're allowed to give him a wife.
I also have a question.
So, and Yitzi asked the question. So the question is, why did he say, if I had known you before you were married, I could have helped you before you were married, you wouldn't have been able to help him? Because as an evidivary, it wouldn't have worked. You can only right? You only get a wife in slavery if you go in as the wife. Anyway, okay. Anyway, he answers that the only time the master can force him to take a wife is if he already has a wife. But if he wants a wife, then he can take a wife even if he wasn't married, which is a huge chiddush. I never heard that before. Yeah. He needs a wife, but he doesn't.
probably.
That could go either way.
That's dangerous.
Okay. We had in the Besdin, we had a convert. We had a man that was a Jewish man, wanted to marry a convert girl that came into the Besdin, and the girl didn't convert yet. And the guy told us that there's a problem with his lineage. He may be a mamzer. Now, there's no problem for a mamzer to marry a convert, but rabbi in the Besdin got very excited. He says, we have a solution. And he didn't tell him the whole solution, but basically what he would do is he would take when the girl is going to the mikveh to convert, instead of converting as a Jew, she would convert as a slave. Then he would marry her, and then the children he would just free. And this would be his wife. He could do that. We figured it out. Anyway, we started to look into if there was any precedent for anyone doing this. And we didn't find any precedent. And the rabbi said this: the fact that there's no precedent, no one wanted to talk about it. That's because that's for other reasons. But it doesn't mean that it never happened. Anyway, the rabbi that was involved in this just decided to go to another Besdin that works a lot quicker than me. They do things rushed, and they converted her, and with whatever. We lost an opportunity to have a good
Can you make someone
article.
slave?
Well, the question is, and if it would work, if we would get arrested in American law for slavery. Yeah, sounds illegal. No?
What about an indentured servant?
Yeah, would that still be illegal?
We'll get you off also. Don't worry. Our law firm specializes.
I think you make an
It's called an Eved Kanani. Would it be called a Shifcha Kanani? She would be a Shif. Who would be the master? I don't know. Someone, whoever wanted would be the master. You can give the master to him. You can make him the master. Okay. Anyway. What do you say, Naftali?
I read an article about this, believe it or not.
Sure. Of course you did.
And the article said it's clear in halakha that today Jews can't own slaves, but call him minhag Medina. So it said, yes, there are Jewish slave owners at present time.
Backyard.
Naftali, it's a beautiful day. Get on that motorcycle right over here.
There you go.
We compared it to the sale of chametz. Someone informed the Hungarian. Where are the Jewish slave owners from Naftali?
Backyard.
Turks and Caicos.
Yeah, in some Arab countries.
From Arab countries.
Maybe they're Arabs.
So they
Our democratic brethren in Arab countries still own slaves.
So he compared it to the sale of chametz, that the Hungarian government was informed that the Jews are doing this huge transaction and they're not paying any taxes on it. And they looked into it and the government said, oh, it's nothing, it's not considered a real sale. So they told the Chassam Sofer that the government doesn't even consider a sale of chametz a sale. How do we eat it after Pesach? It's not a real sale. Even the government does. He says the government is one thing and halacha is another thing. So we'd say also that for slavery it wasn't for the government it's not slavery, and for halacha it's slavery. And we was able to to divide that up. Anyway, Rabbi Lezer Reimer Hareze Eved Mamzer. Rabbi Lezer says that this is a Eved Mamzer, the slave is a Mamzer. Rabbi Lezer, my time with Rabbi Lezer. You hear this? Rabbi Lezer says, what's the reason for Rabbi Eliezer? That's Rabbi Lezer ben Pedas says, what's the reason for Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkenes? Rabbi Lezer Agadol. Damakra, it says, Pasuk says, by a Mamzer, it says, Gam Dor Asiri Lo Yavei Loi Bekal Hashem. Even the 10th generation can't come in. Pasuk says, Loi Lo Yavei Loi. He can't come in. Halach Acher Psuloi. You always go after what's worse, the worst situation. Rabbanan, what do the Rabbanan do? It says, Ahubi Yisrael Shenas Mamzeres. That's talking about a regular Jewish man that marries a Mamzeres girl. I mean, it could have entered your mind to say, that you follow the father. Ksiv, Asa Loi Afke. The Pasuk Loi tells us that it doesn't follow the father, it follows one that's worse. Rabbi Lezer, Lava Fagav the Ksiv, Meshpais and Vesa Vesam, Asa Loi Afke, Achanami Afagav the Ksiv, Ishav Yelada, Tila Adina, Asa Loi Afke. According to Rabbi Lezer, even though the pasuk says when we don't follow, so too we don't follow that because it says lie. Also, when it says that the woman and her children belong to the master, we also don't follow that, and they become a mamzer. Rabbanan kol vlad b'mei shifcha knanes kevlad b'mei behema dami. It says it's not even considered like a child, and it's not even considered like his child, and that's why it gets cleansed. When it's born, but it will have no relationship to the father, and that's why the child won't be a mamzer. But up to this is Asar Yochsin is the last parak of Sefta Kiddushin. It's very interesting. Let's go on. Let's go on.
It's like a Jewish woman that unfortunately had a non-Jewish husband against her will. The child is Jewish, has no relationship.
Right, exactly. Okay, it says Asar Yochsin Alami Babel. There were 10 categories of lineage that came up from Babylonia, from when they returned by the second temple with Ezra. Who were these 10? So here, let's go through the list. Kayanim is 1, Leviim is 2, Yisraelim 3, Chalali, that's a Chalal. That's Kayanim that were not eligible to be Kayanim. It's 4, Geirei, converts. Charurei is talking about slaves that were freed. Mamzerei, that's a Mamzer. Nasinei, the Gibeonites. Shtuki, Vasufi. Shtuki and Asufi is, Shtuki means silent, and Asufi means gathered. Which Shtuki, let's wait for the Mishnah, we'll explain in a second. Kayanim Levi Yisraelim Mitar Levazeh. The Kayanim Levi and Yisraelim, they're allowed to marry each other. Levi Yisraeli Chalal Geir v'Charuri Mitar Levazeh. A Levi, a Yisrael, and a Chalal, and a Ger, a convert, and a freed slave, they can all marry each other. Geir v'Charuri Mamzere, what we just did over there is we took the Kohen out, obviously. Geir v'Charuri Mamzere Nesini Shituki v'Asufi Kul Mitar Levazeh. The converts, the freed slaves, the Mamzerim, the Gibeonites, the Shituki, and the Sufi, they're all permissible to marry each other as well. Ve'elohim Shtuki. Now the Mishnah translates. What is a Shtuki? Kol shu maker es imai vein maker es aviv. He knows who the mother is, but he doesn't know who the father is. Right. Asufi. What is an Asufi? Kol shenesaf min ashuk. Vein maker leyasav leyasimai. He doesn't know the mother or the father. Was found in the like the train station, or what do they call it? Like yeah. Abashal hayakir l'shtuki beduki. Abashal would call the shtuki. He would say it's a beduki because you can ask. Beduki means examine. You can ask the mother, if you know the mothers, you can ask the mother who it was, and then you have to figure out, with who she had relations with. Well, Asari Yochsin Olam Babel, the Gemara says 10 types of families came up from Babel. My Yeri the Tani Olam Babel. Why did you call it Olam Babel? Why did you say came up from Babel? Nisni Halchalei Tzishol, I just say came to Israel. Why do you say came up from Babel? What's the difference where they came from? Well, Milsa Gavorcha Kamash Malan. I think the Gemara is asking more on the Alu, why they came up. That's the question. It's coming to teach me a matter by the side. The Tanya was taught in a brayse of a kamta. You'll get up and you'll go to the place that Hashem chose for you. This teaches us that the Beis Hamikdash was higher than the rest of Israel. And Israel, yeah.
Whoa.
And then Eretz Yisrael is higher than all other lands. I understand what it means that the Beis Hamikdash is higher than all of Israel. It says that if you have conflict and you go to you go up to the place of the Beis Hamikdash to ask by the Sanhedrin. But how do you know that Israel is higher than all other lands? I get that the Beis Hamikdash is higher than the rest of Israel, but how do you know that Israel is higher than other lands? So says Hashem, days are coming. No more will you say that by the life of God, like you'll swear by God by saying that took the Jewish people out of Egypt. Referring to Hashem that will bring back all the exiles. But it says that'll bring up from the north, which would be Babel. Okay, so we know what it means to bring up. We say that's up. And from all other lands. Remember listening to a drasha when I was a kid, and the rabbi said, the Targum on Parsha Shmoi says, "V'lein shmas b'nei Yisrael, v'lein shmas b'nei Yisrael, aboy Mitzrayim." This it says, "V'lein shmas b'nei Yisrael, the alu l'Mitzrayim." It says the alu. So he asked the question, why does it say the alu to go up? So he said that because it's Yeridol Tzarchli, I had like a whole chat. But anyway, when I got older and I used the dictionary, I see that alu in Aramaic actually means that entered. It doesn't mean to go up. Anyway, it was a nice chat till before I learned what the word meant, but it's not accurate. In Hebrew, alu means or Allah means to go up. In Aramaic, it means to enter. Anyway,
so is he saying this is not to be taken literally? I mean, it's obviously not correct.
What?
The statement that the Beis Hamikdash is higher than anything else in Israel, that Israel is higher than any other land.
No, this is a Hebrew word, alu. This is correct.
How old were you when you?
But it's not correct.
Why?
Because you can stand in Israel and see that it's not higher than anything else.
Yeah. There's a question that I have on this. It says, Yerushalayim harim savivla, that Yerushalayim has mountains that surround it.
True.
So, right? So it sounds like it's not really the highest, but I'm not sure.
It's the highest spiritual.
Maybe it means spiritually.
Maharal says it's from the spiritual.
Oh yeah? Okay. Maharal says it's spiritual.
It's the spiritual center of the world.
Yeah. My area, the Tani Alu, Mi Bavel, Nisni Alu L'Eretz Yisrael. Why does it say where they came from? It says they came. The main point is that there's 10 types of people in Eretz Yisrael. Nisni Alu L'Eretz Yisrael. Messiah Leila Rabbi Lazar. This is proving what Rabbi Lazar says. Damar Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar said, Lo Yala Ezra Mi Bavel Achasik Kaselis Nakiya Va'ala. You see, Ezra was the leader in Bavel. He makes Aliyah. He comes to Eretz Yisrael. And what was his delay? There's possibly two reasons, I think, that says. One was he was waiting as long as his teacher, Baruch ben Neriah, was alive, he didn't want to leave. Other one, he didn't want to interfere with Yeshua Kain Gadol, who was the Kain Gadol in Eretz. Ezra was a Kain. He didn't want to interfere with the politics that what would happen. So when Yeshua Kain Gadol passed away, he went up. So those are the two possibilities. But before he left, he clarified all the families of Bavel, and he took anyone that had any lineage problem together with him, and he brought him to Israel. Woo. So everyone was there in Bavel that had any sort of problem with the lineage was like marked, and then he brought him with him. Now, it's the expression of Rebbe Elazar is he made it like fine flour, like anything, any what's it called, any chaff or whatever is in there was removed. So Bavel was perfect from then.
Any Jews
Cleansed.
anywhere go to Israel are doing Aliyah. So this Yala is not just from Bavel, it's from anywhere.
Right. Okay, now we have a statement. Abaya Amar Olamei Aleim Tanan. Abaya says not that Ezra brought them, but they came on their own. Now, why would they have come on their own? Says, well, maybe they wanted to start over without everyone knowing them, so they moved to another place, possibly. Whatever the case is, Rav Amar Helam Tanan. Rava says that Ezra actually brought them with him. It sounds like he wanted to keep his eyes on them, make sure they don't marry someone that they're prohibited to. And this argues with Rabbi Elazar. That Ezra brought them with him. Abaya, let's say the Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi, let's say the Rabbi Elazar. That's what it looks like. It looks like Abaya doesn't hold of Rabbi Elazar. Not necessarily. If you want, you could say differently. The Kuliyam Misl the Rabbi Elazar. Everyone holds of Rabbi Elazar. Here the machlekes is Abaya says that he separated them from everyone else, and then on their own they went. Why did they go on their own? Probably because they wanted to start over. Everyone knew who they were, that there were problems with them. That's not good for shidduchim. So literally. So Mar Savar, the other one said, the other opinion, which is Rava, would say Bal Kerchayu Asukinu, that against their will he brought them up. He slept them with him. So he wanted to watch them. Bishlam Lamandamar, although it works out well according to the opinion that says that they went up on their own. It says there's two stages here. All lands are considered a mixture compared to Eretz Yisrael, and Eretz Yisrael is considered a mixture compared to Bavel. So, Bavel is pure. Question is that if they came up, if they came up on their own, then when they came up to Eretz Yisrael isn't as pure as Bavel, because they came up to Bavel on their own, and no one was aware that they came, and no one knew how to so there was mixtures that were going on in Eretz Yisrael. But if Ezra had brought them with him, so he kept their eyes on them, made the Yadino, then he would surely know. And he would, why were you saying that Eretz Yisrael was considered a mixture, that not all the families were perfect? It says, Nihid Yadi Lahudara, for that generation they knew. The future generations say it wasn't so clear. According to the opinion, it says they came up on their own. Is that the name of a river? Ezra said that he gathered them all at this place. They stayed there 3 days, and he examined the people, and from the Kayanim and from the Levium, he didn't find anyone. So the problem is that Ezra didn't know beforehand who was with him, and he had to stop over there. They are punished from the Levium not coming, but we'll see that. I'll leave that for tomorrow. But what it means over here is that he didn't know who was with him because the people were coming on their own. But if he was the one that was bringing them, of course he knew who was there. He was the one that was looking out. So it says he knew who was puzzle was with him, but he didn't know all the people that were kosher that were with him. That he didn't know. Okay, let's leave it over here.
Oh.
What if you have a judgment against you? What if you have a judgment against you? It doesn't matter whether it's appropriate or not.
Tomorrow it's long.
But like enough time passed.
We're getting there.
Yeah.
Okay. Have a good week, everyone.
Didn't know about the legal thing happening.